You know, there's one story in the Bible that is super famous, reenacted all the time, and that's a story about the birth of Jesus. To understand why it's so popular, you got to understand why the other stories are not so great. So this bloke here is trying to explain the apple story. So you got a couple in a garden. It's a garden with a whole lot of stuff in it, including an apple tree. They get told you can't eat the apples. You might say, who told them not to eat the apples? The guy whose apple tree it is. Anyhow, that bloke, he's not doing anything with the apples. He's not making cake, he's not making cider, he's doing nothing. He's just saying, don't touch my apples. Anyhow, they touch the apples, they eat an apple, and that leads to the downfall of mankind. The end. I think we can agree that the first story was a failure, but this one is a doozy. It's a story about a boat full of animals and a bloke called Noah. Now you see, Apple Tree comes up with a plan to kill everybody. Most stories involve the hero thwarting the attempts, but Noah, he's on board. And so they kill everybody, and you're thinking, who's that guy in the sea? He's asking for help. Did Noah help him? Everybody had to die because Apple Tree Guy says everyone has to die. And I would say everyone lived happily ever after, but they didn't. They died in a watery grave. So you've got the Nativity Story that's more like Marley and Me. You've got a couple that are together, and then you get the third wheel. And the third wheel, of course, is the Apple Tree Guy. So you've got the couple, Joseph and Mary, that are together, all good, and then Apple Tree comes up with an idea. You see, this bloke here, he loves his sacrifices. Women, children, want you to kill your son, that kind of stuff. But he comes up with an idea. Instead of sacrificing someone else, I'm going to sacrifice myself. So with that, he gets Mary pregnant. 9 months later, Mary and Joseph are going to Bethlehem. They can't find accommodation, so they end up staying in a barn, and she gives birth to Jesus. And afterwards she's visited by the 3 kings maybe, or maybe they're 3 wise men. Either way, that's not the full story. Once you start reading a bit more, there's another story. So in this story, Joseph is 40 years old, got to get his act together. He gets married, but not to Mary, but to someone else. Who knows what her name is? Either way, she lives for 49 years, gives him 6 kids. By this stage, Joseph is the ripe old age of 89, so no time to lose, if you know what I mean. So he heads off to Jerusalem to get betrothed or engaged to the next bride, which happens to be a 12-year-old Mary. I don't know about you, but I don't think a 12-year-old and an 89-year-old would have much in common. And to be honest, Joseph was probably a little bit of a jealous man. So you can imagine that by the time Mary got pregnant, he was a little bit on the suspicious side. And so Joseph basically says to Mary, I'm going to sleep on it and work out what to do tomorrow, which is always a little bit scary in those biblical times. So surprise, surprise, Joseph is visited by an angel that says, it's not your baby, it's not someone else's baby, it's the Apple Tree Guy's baby. So there's a bit of a subplot where the wise men have dreams that the king of the Jews will be born, so they go to Herod the Great, who's basically the king of Judea, and tell him that he's obviously really livid about this, and so he says, well, when you find him, can you report back to me? These wise men follow the star of Bethlehem that leads them to the stable where there's Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus. And although this story is completely historically inaccurate, we do know the wise men were most probably actually astronomers. So they used to follow stars around and try to find any meaning out of it. They had no idea what stars were. They couldn't even work out where the sun went at night, but they were still called astronomers. Another thing that you won't read in the canonical Gospels, or the Gospels of Luke and Matthew, is that there was another person supposedly in the barn, and that was Mary's half-sister, Mary Salome. So the story goes that she wasn't convinced that Mary was a virgin, had a little bit of a poke around, and as a result her hands burst into flames. So the wise men, after meeting Jesus, they're meant to return back to Herod the Great. Obviously, with Jesus supposedly being the king of the Jews, they know that Herod the Great is just going to try to kill him. Since Herod the Great doesn't know the whereabouts of Jesus, he decides to kill all the kids in town. Obviously, a bit of a rip-off on the Moses story. It is interesting, however, that Herod the Great actually did kill one of his wives and a couple of his offspring. So he was a murdering bastard, just not that kind of murdering bastard. Okay, so that concludes my nativity story. I actually made this video to learn about a free app on the iPad called FlipaClip. Found it's pretty easy to use, though I learned a few things along the way, such as using multiple layers for the draft, for the outline, and for colouring. So if you want to learn a bit about that, one novice to another, then post a comment. I also put the clips together using iMovie, which comes standard on the iPad. While I had some fun with the content material, it's not my intention to make fun of anyone, of course. If you like the video, then hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons, and maybe I'll make another video, in which case your suggestions would be welcome.